These techniques follow through to fabulous ends. Techniques with intent. Nine techniques to take your watercolor farther, each one with its own endgame. Sure, all those techniques you've learned are fun, but what do you use them for? Here are 9 plausible, practical, artistic applications for you to try. Believe in yourself. I believe in you. I believe you'll be making the foundational wet wash. As a rule, you want to work on wet. That way you won't have lines in the work that you do. You can work with clear water, or you can work with wet washes and then apply your second level right on top of the wet base that you've created. That way, the colors will bleed into a lovely melding of what you've started. The second technique is sponge technique. I'm going to start with a wet, light colored base, something nice and antique-y. Then we'll let that dry completely. The vignette around Work Hard, Stay Humble is made by sponge. I'm using a makeup sponge. It's natural sponge. It's very absorbent. Before you start, get it wet and wring it out and apply a small amount of paint. Forgot I made a little thing here to protect my edges. This way I can be a lot less careful, which might be nice. I haven't gotten more paint. You'll notice it holds quite a bit. I am going to be applying another layer that's slightly lighter, and it has some white mixed in. I never trust myself to not move uphill as I write, so yes, I use pencil guidelines. Make sure you add pencil if you need it after you've done your painting. Any pencil that gets covered by watercolor will be made permanent. For all of this lettering, I am using a Fudena Suko brush pen. I'm setting up now for the splatter technique, and I'm going to start with a base color to set off splatters that are both in contrast and also lighter than this background. This nice juicy background is going to be awesome with my wet on wet that's going to just keep flooding into the wet areas, making an interesting background. Now that that's completely dry, we can go ahead with the splattering. Using a frame like this as a mask also gives me the benefit of being able to see what my splatters look like. Most watercolor brushes are going to be too soft, but oil brushes are generally stiffer and work very well. We're going to change it up a little bit, change up the color, and also give ourselves something to splatter around. I want this to show lighter on this paint that's already there, so I've mixed in a good amount of white, which will help make it opaque. Unlike the wet on wet technique that can be literally used any place you want a lively textured color area, splatter texture is super versatile. Oh, that's sweet. It adds to the believability of a stone texture. It makes freckles, could be snow. But it does require planning. Each of these techniques can be standalone, as I've done them with just a small amount of scribbling or duding it up, or they can add an important level of interest or depth to a larger work. Here I am using a gouache pen. Now it's time for our salt technique. Mix up a wet wash and salt it. And you can literally watch as the salt sucks the pigment to itself, creating one of the frostiest looks you can create with watercolor. So I had to go with that flow. Let it go. Using a salt background is super effective. To me, it looks just like the frost you'd see on your windows in the winter. Again, I'm using the gel, it's not a gel pen, it's a gouache pen, which gouache is the same as watercolor, just extremely dense. Now, I was having a little bit of trouble with the pen, not super happy with what I was seeing, so I was trying to get it to really put out some white. So I was testing on my black tablet there, and I still wasn't happy with that, so I decided to outline the white that I had penned in. It's all just freehand, pretty easy going, but it's still a charming look to be able to work with watercolor this way. For this technique, I am using a very fine point permanent black marker, a technical pen. It's a 0.1 millimeter. Rice works in about the same way salt works, but it creates a different texture, so let's give that a try. Again, you want a very wet wash, nice and juicy. And for this one, I'm going to make little camps. I will have to show the dramatic reveal at the end of the video, but fast forward, you can see that those small little groups of rice have created little areas of texture that to me reminded me of dandelions in full seeded bloom. I won't use any lettering on this one. It'll be a standalone little artlet. In an effort to try to heighten the contrast and bring out some of the white of the dandelion bud, I'm adding white. Let's take a look at the next technique. Here's the finished result. So let's take a look at how we get there. Start with a wash, nice colors that make you feel good, changing it up a little bit, add a little bit of greener to your blue. There we go. And the magic is going to happen when we add drops of alcohol. dots. It's fascinating to watch the alcohol repel the pigment. I'm using rubbing alcohol. I could watch it all day. Dream, plan, do. Don't let anything stand in your way. Technique 7 takes a little more setup than the others. It's dry brush. And dry brush is a little misleading. In watercolor, your brush is still going to be wet. But if your brush looks like this, you're going to see all the little wisps. Now I tested that on purpose so that I have a very clear idea what the brush is going to do, which is central to what you want with dry brush. You don't want any bleeding or running or any of those bloomy kind of things that happen. You'll definitely want to try grasses and flowers and hair and windy things, maybe waves in the ocean. The paper must be completely dry before you do any dry brushing. And you can use any brush, just test it out. Whichever sort of watercolor you enjoy, I hope you continue to work at it and develop it. You will find your way. Each piece will take you down a new path, and it's all good. So I hope you find the joy in your journey. Now we've come to the technique where we use plastic wrap to make some really exciting textures. We wet the entire area, make sure it's nice and juicy, bring in the color, then drop on plastic and give it a chance to crinkle up. So we're just going to let this one sit and dry completely. Where our final technique, bubble texture, is lacking in practical application, it makes up for in sheer cleverness. Simply add pigment to dish soap. Use quite a bit. You want it to be strong. The bubbles will distend it and it will be much lighter. Just keep adding water until the consistency seems about right. You may have to just experiment a little. Prepare your paper, because for this technique you must apply paper to bubbles. Make sure the straw is under the surface of the liquid and gently blow until the bubbles come up over the top. Then press your paper onto the bubbles, or sometimes you can move the bubbles. Anytime you get the bubbles to sit on your paper, they will leave a nice impression. And feel free to do more than one layer. I appreciate all of your support, and especially for the Patreon pledges that keep the creativity funded. Remember to click the thumbs up, ask me your questions, and subscribe. From joesgarage.studio, I'm Natalie Sorensen. Thank you for being here today.